Welcome back to another episode of Opal Wave MTG, a channel dedicated to exploring power levels in EDH and helping you tune your deck to your meta. I'm your host Jacob, and today we're going to be talking about Marath, Will of the Wild, which is my favorite commander in Commander. It really represents my journey experiencing and kind of navigating power levels in EDH and kind of moving up in the power level scale. So Marath is a Naya red, green, and white elemental beast. With Marath enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. Pay X, remove X +1/+1 counters from Marath, choose one, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature, or Marath deals X damage to target creature or player, or put an XX green elemental creature token onto the battlefield. And Marath is super flexible, toolbox kind of a thing. You can do counters, you can do tokens, synergies, or you can just like make a bunch of mana and just ping people down if you really want to. I eventually realized that Marath synergizes really well with enchantments, so I wanted to try doing an enchantment style of build, and from there I upgraded my Enchantress style of build, and I've had a lot of fun brewing and upgrading this deck over the years. So as usual, the deck lists are in the description below. If you want to help support my channel, check out my Fiverr, that'll also be in the description, and come on and join my Discord channel where you can play curated games of EDH over Spell Table. We're still pretty new, getting more people in there though, and so yeah, come on in and let's have a good time. Let's play some good games of Magic. For the Skirmish version of Marath, we've got a Calyx, Destiny's Hand, which can generate a little bit of card advantage with the +1 looking at the top 4 and putting an enchantment card from among them into your hand. The -3 can be removal, getting rid of creatures and enchantments as long as you control a specific enchantment. And the -7, if you've dealt with a board wipe or something, you can use Calyx to bring back all your enchantments from the graveyard to the battlefield. In our creatures, we've got some constellation type stuff: Nexus Wardens, Nessian Wanderer, Citizen Champion, Eidolon of Blossoms. We can get extra, generate a little bit of card advantage when we are playing our enchantments. We've also got the Enchantresses, like the Mason Enchantress, Verdurant Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, as well as some ways to make tokens like Archon of Sun's Grace, Johnny's Chosen, and a Heliod, God of the Sun. Dreamshaper Shaman is also super sweet, since we can essentially turn some of the tokens that we're making with Marath into more real creatures that are in the deck, or we can filter enchantments that we're creating as well and get better hopefully better enchantments, depending on what situation you're in and what kind of stuff you have. So moving on to our sorceries, we've got some ramp spells: Cultivate, Explosive Vegetation, Kadama's Reach, stuff like that. Blasphemous Act is a really great board wipe. Escape to the Wilds can be a fun way to generate a lot of card advantage, since you're going to exile the top 5 cards of your library, and you can play an additional land off the top, or play a land from them, or just play an additional land this turn in general, so whether it's from your hand or from exile or whatever. And then we've got some MDFCs, Balagad, and the Turn Timber Symbioses, just a little bit more flexibility and some recursion with the Balagad. So in our instance, we've got some pretty straightforward removal here, some protection like Boros Charm and a Heroic Intervention, as well as an Obscuring Haze, in case we need to start swinging at people, and we can kind of just fog for the turn essentially. In our artifacts, we've got a Hammer of Perforos, which is an enchantment, so that will trigger our Enchantress, our Constellation, stuff like that. And you can sacrifice a land to make a 3/3 enchantment artifact creature token that can also trigger our constellation type stuff, so some fun synergy going on there. Moving on to our enchantments, we got a bunch of enchantments here, so we can trigger all of our Enchantress style effects. Goblin Slide can, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, cast an enchantment, you can pay 1, make a 1/1 dude. Barrage the Expendable, so we can sacrifice our dudes to deal 1 damage to players or creatures if we need to. Seal of Fire and Omen of the Forge, some extra removal in addition to stuff like Seals of Primordium, Seal of Cleansing. Then we've got Sphere of Safety and an Authority of the Consuls for a little bit of extra protection. Curse of Stalk Prey and Hardened Scales can let us get some extra +1/+1 counters on Marath in addition to the first Rowan games. And a lot of ramp stuff like Market Festival, Overgrowth, Font of Fertility, Wolf Haven. It's going to be a really great way for us to ramp and get those Enchantress triggers that we want. Really nice synergy going on there. Then we've got a Sigil of the Empty Throne, generates some extra threat, and an Elemental Bond, which draws when a creature power 3 or greater. So when we cast our commander, it'll enter with the counters, it'll trigger Elemental Bonds, we can draw a card, but also if we have the Sigil of the Empty Throne out, it'll make a 4/4 when we cast an enchantment, and from there that'll trigger Elemental Bond, and we can like create a build your own Enchantress trigger. Essentially, we're going to draw cards when we cast an enchantment, so pretty sweet there. In our lands, we've got a bunch of lands that can, enter tapped, some lands that can enter untapped. It's Skirmish, it's a low power level, we're just chilling, not really trying to get out the gate super fast here. Just throw out some enchantments, maybe cast your commander a little bit, have a good time, nothing too crazy here. Moving on to the battle version of Marath, we've upgraded our ramp just a little bit. We've added some of these 1-mana dorks, and that's because, it can always be good when you're trying to make upgrades to look at the play pattern of your deck. And this deck really wants to play some Enchantresses, and these Enchantresses happen to be 3 mana. So a really great play pattern for a deck like this is to do turn 1 dork and to turn 2 Enchantress, since, you'll have 1 mana on turn 1 and then 3 mana on turn 2. So adding these dorks is going to help create that play pattern and make it a little bit more consistent. We've also added a Bloom Tender, a very powerful ramp style card in this deck. Destiny Spinner is going to help make our stuff uncounterable. We've added some extra tutors like the Recruiters to help us get our Enchantresses online a little bit faster. And a Perforos to help us close out the games as well, since Marath can make dudes and we can start pinging the table with Perforos. Very strong effect here. Moving on to our sorceries, we've still got the Cultivate and the Kadama's Reach. We've added some tutors like Open the Armory, Eldritch Evolution, Finale, Devastation, Green Sun Zenith, as well as a Savine's Wreck to help us get some of our important enchantments back from the graveyard. And we've still got that Mulligan Recovery, because why not? Green Suns is also really cool because it still follows that play pattern of turn 1 dork into turn 2 Enchantress, because we do have the Argothian Enchantress, which is on 2. So essentially for 3 mana we can cast our Green Suns, get our Enchantress out, or if you really maybe it's a little bit later and you want to grab an Eidolon or maybe a Vexing Shusher, Collector Roof, we've got some pretty decent targets in the deck for it. So moving on to our instant package here, a little bit more protection with the Teferi's Protection and some extra tutors. I like Domri's Call, Court of Calling, Worldly Tutor. Leave Chance is another really sweet one, since if there's a board wipe or something like that, we can use Leave to return any number of target permanents we own to our hand. Or if we want to get a bunch more Enchantress triggers, we can return a bunch of our enchantments to our hand and start casting our enchantments all over again. Get a bunch of draw triggers. A great way to refill our hand, especially if we're kind of like in a position where we don't have a lot of cards in hand, but we have an Enchantress on board or something like that. We're really sweet. And we don't have a ton of removal here, because a lot of our removal is actually going to be in the enchantments, funny enough, as well as some Staxy type things. Just a Soul Ring, since we are on the Collector Roof, and the Stony Silence, kind of want to mitigate, that being kind of bad and affecting us. So, like I said, we got some removal in our enchantments, stuff like Grasp of Fate, Aura of Silence, Cinder Vines. We've got these seals. We've got, and Marath himself will also be a fantastic way to control the board, especially if we get something like an Unbound Flourishing out or a Hardened Scales, Branching Evolution. These cards, Marath is going to do a really great job of controlling the board of creatures. So, focusing a lot of our removal on the non-creature type stuff, and then having stacks pieces that Marath can kind of thrive under is going to be really great for a deck like this. Then we've got the Mana Echoes, which is going to be one of our combo pieces. So as long as you have a Branching Evolution, Hardened Scales, or an Unbound Flourishing, you can technically generate, well, not technically, but you can generate an infinite amount of mana and counters on Marath, and from there you can ping the table. So essentially, we'll have a Mana Echoes out and a Hardened Scales. And then from there, we're going to, let's say Marath starts on 1 counter, we're going to use 1 mana, and we're going to remove a counter from Marath to make an elemental. That's going to trigger mana echoes, and you're going to make 2 colorless mana because you have Marath plus the token elemental. You're going to use one of those counters and remove a counter from Marath and put a counter on Marath. So now you have the Hardened Scale trigger, and that's going to, or it's not a trigger, it's a replacement effect, excuse me, and that's going to put 2 counters on Marath. So now you have 1 colorless mana, and you're back up to 3 counters on Marath. So from here, you can use the colorless mana you have, remove a counter from Marath, and make another elemental. And this is going to generate 3 colorless mana because now you have the 2 tokens plus Marath. You can use one of the colorless mana to put a counter back on Marath, and then Hardened Scales is going to replace that and add another counter to Marath. So you go back up to 3, and then you can use another mana to put a second counter on Marath, and that'll put Marath up to 4 counters, and you still have 1 colorless mana floating. So from there, you can remove a counter from Marath and make another elemental. And because of that, you're going to have 4 colorless mana from the mana echoes because you now have the 3 tokens plus Marath, and from there it becomes exponential because you start making more and more and more mana and you don't have to spend as much mana to start getting that value. So from there, you're going to start making basically infinite colorless mana. With infinite colorless mana, you could put an infinite amount of counters on Marath, and then from there you can deal an infinite number of damage to the table. So a great win condition. Cathar's Crusade can also kind of do the same thing, where if you have Cathars plus the mana echoes is going to trigger. You're going to be able to make a bunch of mana, but the Cathar's Crusade is only going to put an additional counter on Marath every time you make a dude. So you won't actually be able to ping the table down, but you will make an infinitely large board out of like infinitely large creatures, or at least arbitrarily large. It won't be infinite technically, but a pretty decent win con if you need to pass the turn and then just kind of wait for hopefully no one has a response, or you've got like some protection like the Fairy's protection. That can be really good. And stuff like Mana Reflection and Rory's Wake, so we can really start going ham, drawing a bunch of cards, casting a bunch of enchantments, that kind of stuff really plays well into our game plan. Moving on to the lands, basically, cut a lot of the lands that are entering the battlefield untapped. We've added a Sarah Sanctum for a little bit of extra synergy. If you'd rather, you can also do like a Nykthos instead if you want like a cheaper option. They're both kind of sort of the same role, or you could just run a Nykthos in addition to the Sarah Sanctum. Depends on what you're looking for. And before we move on to the glory version of this Marath Enchantress list, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you did with your version of Marath in the comments below. And moving on to the glory version of Marath. So essentially, this is our cEDH version of Marath. It's still very themed, but we're trying to, really make the win cons as efficient as possible, and we're making sure that we have the tools needed to deal with other cEDH decks. So we've upgraded our ramp, got a bunch of dorks here now, kind of, to lean heavier into the idea of turn 1 dork, turn 2 enchantress type thing. We've kind of cut the less. We do want a decent amount of enchantresses in the deck so we can start getting that draw engine going. But we also don't want to just, we want to increase the quality and reduce kind of like the ones we don't really need anymore. So I did cut the Verdure Enchantress and the Mesa Enchantress in favor of, the extra tutors that we have in the deck, and for more efficient combos, stuff like that. So we've got stuff like the Grand Abolisher that can help protect our combos, some extra stacks pieces like the Aven Mind Sensor, the Draneth. Still got the Collect Roof, which is really nice, and an Esper Sentinel. That way, Esper Sentinel is a super powerful card, even though it's not an enchantment. Would be really cool if it were though. It's still a great source of card advantage for our deck, and even though we are playing on this like enchantress type of thing, it's okay to kind of divert a little bit from that in order to add some of these stable cards in your deck. Then we've got this Cryptic Trilobite, which is going to function much like the Mana Echoes in our battle version, and a Conclave Mentor to add a little bit more redundancy to this combo. So essentially, very much in the same vein as that Mana Echoes combo. So we're going to cast our, let's say we have Conclave Mentor out and a Cryptic Trilobite on two counters. And we've got this Marath. We'll cast it. It'll enter with 4 counters because of the Conclave Mentor. And so Cryptic Trilobite has remove a +1/+1 counter on it to add 2 colorless mana. So from here, we're going to remove one of the counters from Cryptic Trilobite, and we will make 2 colorless mana. We'll use one of that mana to remove a counter from Marath, targeting our Cryptic Trilobite. And this is going to put 2 counters on Cryptic Trilobite because of the Conclave Mentor. From there, Cryptic Trilobite now has 3 counters on it, and we still have 1 colorless mana floating. So we can remove the 2 counters that we just put on Cryptic Trilobite to generate 4 extra mana. So now we have 5 colorless mana. From there, we can put counters on Marath and put counters on Cryptic Trilobite to continue to generate more and more mana, because the amount of mana you invest into the Cryptic Trilobite and keeping Marath even is going to be less than the amount that Cryptic Trilobite actually makes, because you're paying 1 to put 2 counters on Cryptic Trilobite, which will make 4. So every 2 mana essentially is going to make 4 mana, because you have to use 1 mana to put a counter on Marath to keep it alive. Then you have to put 1 mana on, or 1 counter on the Cryptic Trilobite. So 2 mana to essentially generate 4 mana. And from there, you're going to make infinite colorless mana. From there, you can put an infinite number of counters on Marath, and then you can ping the table for infinite damage. So a much more efficient form of the mana echoes in this deck. It's also a creature, which is much easier to tutor for in the context of Naya than the mana echo. So it's cheaper, easier to tutor for, more efficient in general. Then we've added, we've got the Sithis, really nice, an extra Enchantress effect that's on 2 instead of 3, and the Sanctum Weaver is also going to be really nice for ramping us as well. Moving on to our sorceries, we've got the Eldritch Evolution, Green Sun Zenith, the Tutors, Open the Armory, Idyllic Tutor, and a Gamble. Since we do have the potential to draw a good bit of cards in this deck, our gambles are going to be less risky, less gambly, since we can kind of make sure our hand is nice and big before we do that. And then we've got the Savine's Reclamation, to bring back some of our important enchantments or some of our combo pieces if we need to. Moving on to our instants, added a Veil of Summer, Red Blast, Silence, Swords, just some really cheap interaction type stuff. You don't really see a lot of board wipes for enchantments in cEDH, so if you do, that could be a reason to run like Heroic Intervention or Teferi's Protection. But generally you don't really, like, the worst thing that's going to happen is like a Psych Rift. And even then, if you like, Teferi's Protection in response to that, the job is done, right? Because they're going to be able to untap, or at least go about their turn without the stacks pieces, the enchantments on the battlefield still. So it can be a little awkward, trying to really protect your enchantments outside of stuff like Red Blast or, stuff like that. So moving on to our artifacts, we've added a Chromox and a Mana Crypt, and we've also added a No Rod. So even though we're going a little bit further into the anti-artifact type stuff in the deck, we still want to be able to ramp out, occasionally, get a little bit of a faster start, like a turn 1 Drannith Magistrate, turn 1 Even Mind Sensor, turn 1 Enchantress can be really strong, or even just a turn 1 No Rod or turn 1 Oof if you really need to. Helps us get our stack pieces out just a little bit faster in some cases, and that's worth it in my opinion, especially when you're playing in cEDH. Moving on to the enchantments, we've still got a lot of the removal and the Staxy type stuff, Aura of Silence, Grasp of Fate, Rest in Peace is going to be really important. Less of like the generic or stacks pieces, and more we're kind of honing in on the stacks pieces that are going to have the biggest impact. Hitting graveyards is huge. Making sure that lands and artifacts are entering the battlefield tapped is really big. Making artifacts cost more is going to be huge. We don't really want to be on like Rule of Law because of the nature of the deck. We like to cast a lot of spells on our turn. One of our combos is actually a combo that requires us to cast Marath multiple times that we'll get to in just a second. But yeah, overall, hitting the tutoring, hitting the graveyards, hitting the artifacts is probably the best angles of attack you can be doing at a cEDH table. So that's the ones that we've prioritized here. Then we've also got a Greater Aromancy, which with the Sterling Grove can make our auras, our enchantments, just like basically gives everything Shroud. It's going to make our board really hard to deal with. And if you see here, we've got this Earthcraft, which is one of our combo pieces, in addition to just being a really good ramp type spell. So essentially, once you get Fertile Ground with an Earthcraft on it, you can go infinite. So let's actually go to the play tester for this one. So we're going to get our Earthcraft. Then we need so you can do this with Fertile Ground as like the primary one, but you can also use, you know, like an Abundant Growth plus a Wild Growth, as long as your basic land can tap for 1 mana of any color. The combo will work. So let's say we have 3 mana out here, and we've got our Enchanted Basic Forest with the Fertile Ground on. We're going to pay 3. We're going to cast Marath, and Marath is going to enter the battlefield with 3 counters. From here, we're going to tap our Marath, and we're going to untap the basic. So this basic's going to untap. We're going to tap our basic for 2 mana. It doesn't really matter what colors it is at this point, because we're going to use the 2 mana, and we're going to make 2 tokens. So right now, Marath has 1 counter on it, and we have 2 1/1s. We're going to tap our 2 1/1s to untap this forest. And we're going to tap our forest twice. Let's say we make a red, a green, or a red, 2 green, and a white, since our Fertile Ground can tap for any color. So right now we have 1 counter on Marath and 4 mana. So we're going to use one of the green that we generated, and we're going to produce an additional 1/1 elemental. Marath is going to die due to state-based actions. So now we have 3 mana, a red, a green, and a white, and this elemental. So we're going to tap our elemental, we're going to untap our forest, we're going to tap our forest, and now we have 5 mana. From here, we can recast our commander, and every time we do this loop, we're going to generate 2 more mana that we can use to recast Marath again. So to demonstrate my point, Marath is now at 5 counters. We're going to tap on Marath, we're going to untap that forest, and then we're going to make 2 more elementals. I'm pretty sure I can just do that. Yep. So Marath is now at 3 counters. We're going to tap these 2 elementals, and we're going to untap this forest twice. We have 4 colorless, or 4 mana, and we have 3 counters on Marath. So we're going to use 3 of our mana, and we're going to make 3 more elementals that are all going to be here. Marath is going to die again due to state-based actions. Marath goes to our command zone. So right now we have 1 mana floating still, because we had 4. We used 3 of it to remove the counters, and we have these 3 elementals. We're going to tap our 3 elementals, and each one of these elementals is going to produce 2 mana because of our enchanted forest. So that produces 6 mana plus the 1 that we had left over. We now have 7 mana left over. We can recast our commander. And then from here, we can loop this over and over and over and over again until Marath is a 4,000,001, 4,000,001. It does need to be odd, since it's going to go 3, 5, 7, 9, you know, proceeding on. So Marath is arbitrarily large at this point. Once Marath is extremely large, you're going to tap your Marath to untap the forest. And from here, you're going to tap your forest. You're going to continue to do what you've been doing, where you make 2 elementals. Then those 2 elementals are going to be 4 elementals. 4 elementals makes 8 elementals. 16, 32, 64, 128. You're going to continue to do this over and over and over again until you have a very large amount of mana. And because Marath has like 4 million counters on it, you're going to use the, well, I guess the 3 million at this point. You're going to use the arbitrary large amount of mana that you just made and the counters that are on Marath to ping the table for a very large amount of damage. Since everyone only has like, you know, probably 40 life at this point, or probably less because it's cEDH, you will just kill the table. So a really cool and efficient combo that we need to cast our commander multiple times. But generally, like if your opponent has a like a Rhystic Study out or something like that, it's really important that you start your turn off with like a Silence or a Grand Abolisher, so your opponents, even though they're going to be drawing their deck, they won't be able to really respond outside of like an Otawara or a Boseiju, depending on what colors they have. So just keep that in mind as you're doing that specific combo. But we do have ways that we can combo through, you know, a Rule of Law, or to play under a Rhystic Study with the Hardened Scales, or the the Conclave Mentor with the Cryptic Trilobite. So moving on to our lands, we've got we've got a bit more basics than we usually have, just because we want to be able to hit our basics for the Fertile Ground Earthcraft combo. The sooner we can get a forest out, the sooner we can enchant it. And most of the time, people don't really know about this combo very well, so they'll just see that you enchanted a land and then not really think twice about it. But yeah, other than that, we've added a bunch of lands that can tap for multiple colors that are entering the battlefield untapped. Make our game plan a little bit more consistent. We've still got the Serra Sanctum, and we've also got this Flagstone of Trocaera, which is something you probably don't really need in the deck, but because we have the crop rotation, I always think it's fun to sack flagstones to crop rotation, because then you can find Serra Sanctum plus an additional plains and get a little bit extra value out of your crop rotation sometimes. So thanks for checking out this episode of Opal Wave MTG. Again, I'm your host Jacob, and until next time.